Aiy-yu-kwee, Malita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my January 2021 wrap-up. So for January, I did end up reading 5 books. I apologize if you can hear my cat snoring in the background. I also have a different chair because my cat stole my other one. I did read 5 books in the month of January, which equates to 1,274 pages. I read 1 literary fiction, 1 nonfiction poetry, 1 nonfiction memoir, 1 fantasy, YA fantasy, and 1 classic. 3 of those books are own voices by Indigenous authors. In terms of ratings, I have 0, 1 star, 0, 2 star, 1 2.5 star, 1 3 star, 1 3.5 star, 1 4 star, and 1 5 star, giving my average rating for the month of July a 3.6. I also DNF 1 book, but I don't tend to count that towards my read books, but I will talk about it. I just know that it's not included in my stats, but will be included at towards the end of my year stats. So I don't know about the rest of you, but I tend to get really intimidated when it comes to the beginning of the year in terms of what book should be the first book I read at the start of the new year. I really overthought it and started multiple only to put them all down because I was freaking myself out for some reason. But I did end up picking up and finishing Earthkeeper by N. Scott Momaday. This is a finished copy that HarperCollins gifted me, so thank you so much to HarperCollins for this copy. And basically it's reflections on the American land. N. Scott Momaday is a poet and prize-winning novelist, and Earthkeeper just kind of reflects his reflections on native ground, how it influences his people, as he, I believe, is of Indigenous descent, and just how we are able to live off the land, how much it gives us, and how much we need to take care of it. The book is split up into 2 parts, if you can believe it. It's split up into 2 parts, one before colonization and how the earth helped us and how we help the earth, and then after colonization, the greed that comes from overutilizing some of the resources the earth gives us. So I thought it was a really good book to kind of start off the year with. I thought it would be something to ground me, particularly because being in this quarantine and being in this pandemic and not being with anybody and not having our ceremonies has really kind of made me feel isolated. I mean, I feel isolated anyway because of the quarantine, but there was for a bit there where I felt reconnected to my culture and reconnected to my community, my Indigenous community. And with quarantine and the pandemic, it's made it harder. And so even though I work with several people at my current job that would normally be at these ceremonies, it's not quite the same. So this definitely helped in terms of grounding me and just reminding me of the importance of who I am and what I do on this earth. And it was just really nice. It was a nice quick read. This is a nonfiction poetry collection, and content warning for death of an animal if you're sensitive to that. But ultimately, I just found it very just relaxing and calming, and it's definitely one that I will most likely be rereading, as I read this the first day of January, and then January happened. A lot in January happened, so I can't say I necessarily remember everything in here, but because of how short it is and because of how I particularly remember just being how I felt after reading this, and I would like to feel that again, and I feel like this book is something that I will be able to take something from it every time I reread it. So I'm hoping to reread it at some point to be able to just remind myself, which I thought was nice. The next book I read was an advanced reader's copy that I received from a publisher, from Zank Books. This is As You Were by David Tremblay. This is a memoir. David Tremblay is of Indigenous descent, and this memoir is him facing his childhood traumas, or just his life traumas really, and trying to figure out, searching for the domino that fell and forced his family into the cycle of brutality and denial of their own identity. His grandmother went through residential school, brought home the corporal punishment that she learned there, and how that affected his growing up and his family. This is an intense book, and I have a list of content warnings for you. Child abuse, rape, sexual assault, suicide ideation, suicide, graphic depictions of injury, death of a parent, death of animals, including dogs. If you're, I don't know if you're particular, but there are deaths of a couple animals, animal abuse, bullying, the term of the use Indian instead of Indigenous. I know some people can be sensitive to that. Self-harm, murder, PTSD, domestic abuse, racism, homophobia, alcohol abuse, and mention of colonization, specifically residential schools. Yeah, like I said, this book is intense. It's always kind of weird for me to analyze and critique a memoir of just like, here, let me read your life story and see how entertained I am by it. However, I particularly really enjoyed the writing style of this. As intense as this was, David Tremblay was able to, it's all I can think of is a compliment sandwich, and where you like give a compliment, give a critique, give a compliment. So with his writing, it was actually something funny that happened in his life, trauma, something funny, trauma. And it wasn't like haha, like a joke or anything. It was dry, very much dry humor. It's one of those things where you probably shouldn't be laughing, but I ended up telling some of the funnier parts to my partner just to see how he would react, and he laughed too, so we're both just messed up. But it's a very specific humor. I want to call it native humor, and if you know what that is, you know, but otherwise it's particularly fairly dry humor. But like I said, I really enjoyed it. It really felt like David Tremblay was sitting there with me, just telling me his life story, and I really enjoyed it. It made me think of my grandpa. It made me think of my dad. I have a review of this coming out shortly. I actually read this so quickly and so soon because I wanted to be able to get it read in time to make a review for it, but I didn't realize this one comes out like February 17th. So hopefully I will have a full review for you here shortly. So just be wary if you do pick this up. There are quite a few content warnings, and there were multiple spaces where I just had to like set it down and process. The next book I read was a group read, and it's a fairly controversial classic, and that is Bear by Marian Engel. Another relatively short book, which I'm not complaining about. I know my main goal was to read tomes this year. However, I'm fully taking advantage of short books as well. This one was interesting. Basically, we're following a mousy librarian. I kind of thought of her more as an archivist, but basically she is sent to a remote Canadian island where she is supposed to catalog the library of a Colonel Jocelyn Carey, as the estate was donated to this museum. Upon her cataloging on this remote island, this library, but she's finding secrets from Colonel Jocelyn Carey's library, and one of the secrets is that she finds out fairly quickly is that Colonel Jocelyn Carey has a pet bear. And Lou starts to question if a bear is good company, and she soon finds out that not only is a bear good company, it is intimate company. Very intimate. Content warnings in here for bestiality, mention of abortion, and misogyny. I finished this fairly quickly, and I'm still kind of waiting on the group to finish it so we can chat about it, because ultimately this book is fairly reflective. Lou is in a place where she isn't enjoying her life, and when she goes up to this remote Canadian island, she realizes that how uneventful and joyful her life really is. And she starts questioning that, and ultimately she just wants to find love, and she's trying to find love from a bear. And it just made me feel bad for the bear, ultimately. Hi, editing Melita here. I just wanted to clarify that I feel bad for the bear just because Lou was projecting her feelings and her wants and needs onto an animal that ultimately wouldn't be able to understand that, nor would it be able to reflect that back to her. And really, she was just taking advantage of the bear. Nothing really justify what she did to something that could not understand what she was doing or the decisions she was making. So that's ultimately what I was wanting to clarify. And made me really want to go brush my teeth. Yeah. So otherwise the book was fairly reflective in and of itself. Otherwise I didn't find it, I mean, it wasn't necessarily that bad, but it wasn't great. I rated this 2.5. So would I read it again? Probably not. No. So part of my January TBR was to picking 3 books with the word dream in the title for Buzzwordathon. Kayla from Books and Lala had created a readathon that was titled Buzzwordathon, and basically it was taking a word that she found was in being published in the title of books a lot and reading that book or those books that had that title, had that word in the title for the month. For this year, she turned the readathon into a Goodreads group, which now has also a Discord. What I'm doing with this is reading some of my backlist books. So for Dream, I had 3 options. I had The Spinner of Dreams by K.A. Reynolds, I had Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and I also had What Dreams May Come by Richard Matheson, which is in the other room and I'm too lazy to go get it. And basically my thought was that I wasn't going to read What Dreams May Come just because I have seen the movie that comes from this book, and I know that it deals with suicide and wasn't in the mindset to go into it this month. Glad I was aware of that. So it was between these 2, and basically what I gave myself was I gave myself the options of the 3. I didn't have to read all 3, but I was encouraging myself to, but ultimately I had to read 1. So I did end up reading Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. This book follows Laszlo Strange, who is a war orphan, and because of that his last name is Strange, as that's what all the war orphans end up having their last name as at the monastery he grew up in. And since he was 5 years old has been obsessed with the city of Weep. However, it wasn't always called Weep, and Laszlo feels like he's the only one that remembers it was called something else, and he's been trying to search anything he can to figure out more about this city. It is seems to be a city of legend, and everyone else seems to have completely forgotten about it. So when Laszlo becomes a librarian, he delves into the lore of the city of Weep. When warriors end up coming from this city looking for scholars to help them with a problem that they have at the city of Weep, Laszlo jumps at the chance to be able to help. So it kind of goes from there. It took a little bit for me to get into this book, but ultimately I did start really enjoying it. I enjoyed the storytelling, I enjoyed the characters, I particularly really enjoyed Laszlo. His character was really in depth and I kind of really liked him. I knew there was something more to what I kind of was hoping there was something more to him than what we were actually seeing, because my fear going into this, and this is probably why it took me a while to get into it, was that it was going to be a white savior deal, which I don't tend to enjoy, and it wasn't necessarily, but I can't say that I enjoyed it after a while. So we get 2 perspectives. We get Laszlo Strange's perspective. We also get a perspective from a god that after predecessors were essentially slaughtered, she's figuring out how to live with 4 other young gods and goddesses and figuring out their powers as they come into them. It's content warning for war, for graphic depictions of death and murder, particularly death of children, graphic depictions of injury. There's a prejudice in here. I like the prospect of this book, but as soon as a romance was even hinted at, it felt like everything else in this book dropped to the wayside. And I particularly wasn't rooting for the romance at all, mostly because it kind of made everything else flat. I still enjoyed Laszlo. The fact that we got to explore more of his dreams was fantastic. It was very atmospheric and kind of flowery, but everything else about the world lacked a lot, I felt like. And the sole focus was on the romance, and I really just didn't care for it. I wasn't rooting for it. To me, it felt very insta-lovey. I just didn't care. So because of that, I'm giving this 3 stars. This was actually also the Buzzwordathon group book for the month, which was really convenient. I didn't know that until the end of the month. And from the discussion that I saw, some people felt similarly in that there was a lack of something towards the end. And there's quite a few of us that are like, do we even move on to the Muse of Nightmares? I hear that it's not as flowery in the Muse of Nightmares, but that's not the problem I had with it. The problem I had is the romance, and because that's basically how I feel the jumping point is to the Muse of Nightmares, I don't think I'm gonna enjoy it. So I really am just debating on not continuing on with this. I'm not enthused by it, so this may just stop here. So for The Spinner of Dreams, I did start this and didn't care for it. So The Spinner of Dreams is about Annalise Merriweather. She is smart and kind and curious and just loves animals. However, she was cursed by the Fate Spinner when she was born. So anything bad that happens to her town, everyone blames on her. The crops aren't growing anymore. Annalise is the reason why. Someone dies, it's because of Annalise. At a certain point, Annalise gets tired of it and she wants to change her fate. So in order to do that and to become uncursed, she needs to go find the Fate Spinner and reverse the curse. Again, I like the concept. The world was very intriguing, but I just didn't really care for it. I got about 100 pages into it. Put it on pause so I could finish up another book and just didn't really care if I got back to this or not. And I have so many books that I want to get to that I didn't feel bad about not finishing this. So I DNF'd it. I want to try to figure out if I'm just not into middle grade anymore, or if it's just particular middle grade tropes that I'm just not entertained in. I'm curious to figure that out, because yeah, this felt repetitive to me. Some bits were very, very flowery in terms of its environment, but ultimately I really just didn't care for the repetitiveness of it, and I understand why that's in middle grade. I get it, but it's not for me. The last book that I read for January was another advanced readers copy that I got from a publisher, and that is The Removed by Brandon Hobson. This was sent to me by Echo Books, so thank you so much to Echo for sending this to me. This is also available through early release through Book of the Month. So yes, I did get a finished copy because I wanted one. I want to support the author, and I also wanted to encourage Book of the Month to continue offering Indigenous authored books. The Removed by Brandon Hobson. It comes out February 2nd, 2021. Probably before this video comes up, but I'm hoping that I'm able to get a review out on time. This follows the Cherokee family as they prepare for the anniversary of their teenage son's death. It's been 15 years. Every year on the anniversary of his death, they do a bonfire. They get together, have dinner, sit around the bonfire, and remember the teenage son Ray Ray when he was alive. We get multiple perspectives. As the days are leading up to this bonfire, we're realizing that this Cherokee family is having the line blurred between reality and the spirit world. There are a lot of Cherokee stories in here, ancestral and traditional, as well as family stories. And each of these family members are still grieving. They're still figuring out how to grieve, how to either move on from it or how to live from it. And we get that dynamic from them. I think it's like less than a week that we follow them for leading up to Ray Ray's anniversary bonfire. Content warning for drug and alcohol use, assault, stalking, police shooting, death of a son, brother, sibling, racism, use of slurs, and talk of colonization, specifically the Trail of Tears. This I went into really cautiously, and I won't talk too much about it because I do hope to post my review. But I did go into this cautiously after losing a brother myself. This is something that I wanted to be aware of going into this book. And it took me a bit to actually read it because there were a couple of chapters that I just had to put down and process mentally to make sure that I was doing okay and moving forward. And ultimately this was a really self-reflecting book for me. And I absolutely enjoyed the stories in here. They were all kind of open. They had the theme of open-endedness, which I thought I had a problem with. There was like a certain type of frustration of not having these these stories tie neatly at the end. But there's also a kind of hopefulness that that there's so much prospect to them being open-ended. So that was relatively nice and refreshing. It's something that I don't see very often in books. I ultimately really enjoyed this. I feel like upon rereading, I'd catch more details and understand more of the interconnectedness that a lot of this, that I feel like this has throughout. For this first time, it was kind of a struggle just to make sure I was aware of my own mental health going into it and making sure that I was okay every chapter. So I feel like when I'm in a better mental headspace, I'd be able to enjoy this more. It was particularly a difficult month for me. It's been a little difficult, so I hope to reread this in the future. Much like Earthkeeper, I feel like there's more I can learn from it the more I read it. So I am looking forward to that. I gave this 3.54 stars out of 5. So, and then just a little sneak peek on what I'm currently reading for February. I did manage to get a physical copy of How Long Till Black Future Month. This is a N.K. Jemisin short story collection or shorter fiction, and a lot of these are actually, or I don't know if a lot of them, but I know a few of them have actually been turned into some of their longer series or that they've put out. So like The City We Became, there's actually a short story in here that was based off of. It was kind of like the start of their writing process. So I'm really excited about it. I have read N.K. Jemisin before. Like I said, I read The City We Became and want to get more into their work, as I actually really enjoyed The City We Became, but understand that is a little different from the rest of their work. So to be able to understand more of their work, I'm reading this, and so far there's a couple in here. I'll have to do an average when I do my February wrap up of all the stories, but ultimately I think there's one idea enough because I did not understand it. It went completely over my head, but otherwise for the most part they're really fun. I really enjoy them. So there's that. I'm also reading Dracula by Bram Stoker. I was listening to this and had gotten a physical copy and had only gotten about that much through the audiobook from my library when I decided to just go ahead and read it physically. I've kind of put a pause on it for right now so I can go into my February TBR. I believe I'll have more of a chance to read this come March. I was able to find Recursion by Blake Crouch through my library, so I picked that up and started listening to it today actually, and got an hour in, and it sounds really entertaining. I'm really curious about it. Follows a cop named Barry Sutton who's in New York City, and there's a phenomenon that's happening of false memory syndrome. People are waking up with like two sets of memories, like the life they have been living and a life that they hadn't lived at all, but it feels real to them. So that's all I really know about it. That's all so far. It's really kind of freaky. It's like, I feel like I've kind of been avoiding anything to do with a pandemic, but this I feel like is interesting enough and is kind of further away from the virus we're currently fighting, that this is gonna be freaky but interesting, and not enough freaky for me to like have to stop. So I'm excited to read more of this. So these are the books that I read for January and DNF'd for January. If you've read any of these, please let me know your thoughts. Let's discuss it down in the comments down below. I'd like to hear your opinions on some of them. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. If you're new here and you want to see more of my content, please be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell icon so you know when I post more content. You can also find me on other social media, Goodreads, Storygraph, Twitter, Instagram, all that good nonsense. That'll be in my description down below as well. I am also now on Libro. I feel like this is going to be my saving grace during February with such an ambitious TBR. If you haven't seen my February TBR, I highly suggest you do, so you can get more in-depth content of what I plan on reading for February and what I chose for the Buzzwordathon. Check out my raise awareness links. I have links and information to MMIW G2F's groups, that is Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People. There are multiple organizations that I have linked down below that take donations as well as give information about the problems Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people face in the United States and Canada, as well as Turnout, which is an organization down in the Bay Area that helped LGBTQ community in the Bay Area with COVID relief, food, volunteer work. Specifically, I believe they're doing a mentorship program right now that they're trying to get volunteers for, help out with things like Pride. So definitely check those out, and if you can, share and donate where you can. Otherwise, I will see you in a video again soon, and I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. Cheers.